Hi guys, my name is Marcel and this is Steve Matchett. Today we wanted to look over this beautiful 246 GTS Dino. We wanted to bring some light to the car's shape and the actual history and some of the cool history quirks of the vehicle. So starting from the front, we can see that the paint still has beautiful luster. If you come in quickly, you do see all the patina and all the crow's feet that we talked about. There is a small dent right here, and it's actually a concave dent. It has some chipping, as you see. It has been driven. The chrome is still in good shape. It has a little bit of pitting, and you can see in detail there as well. And we look at the arches, we see the beautiful finish that it has down here, and it actually has flaked off. And you see right here in this area, very small surface rust, but very solid and does not go through, and that's exactly what we're looking for. One thing we look for here, you see the seal has perished, and that hasn't been restored, so we want to see that. Down here on this bottom rocker, very important that all of that has a good line and good fit. The doors tend to sag over time, so we see here that that hasn't happened, which is really good. This is the intake snorkel, so you'll hear the intake as you drive the vehicle. And then again, all the fender liner stuff. This is the most important part because we want to make sure that it has good soundproofing in there and it hasn't had any work done, or it doesn't have any rust holes or any of that. Once we get the vehicle up on the lift, you'll get to see underneath it, but going around it, you can see all that. The antenna's still functional, it goes up and down. If you can imagine, the electrics are still working really well. We see again more patina here, more crow's feet, but due to its originality, we want to leave it as such so we show everybody the example of the vehicle. That Ferrari badge was installed at the dealership. It looks very vintage and it has a lot of pitting on it. If you look real closely, you see some of the surface up. So it's not a new badge, it's an original badge. It does have new stainless steel exhaust system. We'll see that underneath it. And then we also have, again, more patina here on the actual bumpers, but all fully functioning in terms of signals, lights, electrics. These tires, if you look real closely, they're Michelin XWX tire systems. And that's important because that's kind of the original tires to this vehicle. See, XWX. And I'll find one with the date stamped on it. Again, looking at this side, more of the stuff that's important to see the fender arches, to be very sane and very solid, very straight car. The door gaps, again, looking at this side, are very important. This seal is in better shape. Naturally, it gets opened less than the other side. Again, very light surface rust just at the edge of this panel right here. We haven't covered it up, didn't want to do anything to deter from the originality of it. So you see the fender liners are actually made out of fiberglass, but the actual body is made out of steel. So you can see that perfectly there. And same thing with the front nose. A lot of people would park these forward and give them a good whack underneath and dent them all up. If you look real closely under here, it still has all its original factory black finish. And I love seeing the wear, but not abuse of the car. And then this beautiful aluminum grille. And then behind it is the radiator and the heat exchanger. You can see all that for yourself as well. The fans are fully functioning, the AC fully functions, and it does really well. It's kind of strange. And then we have the beautiful shaped rear glass, again, stamped with the original manufacturer. There are actually very little wear on the front one. The rears, where the actual hooks go into for the target top, have a little bit of wear on these edges. Still original, so we wanted to make sure we left that and as it was. Later on, we'll put the target top on and you'll get to see what it looks like with it, but it's just as good shape as the rest of the car.
I think without question, the 246 Dino, and this is a 74 example,
right,
is one of the most interesting cars to ever leave the stables of Maranello. And that phrase alone is kind of loaded with intrigue because leaving the stables of Maranello, the car was never badged as a Ferrari. It was really badged under the emblem of Fiat and as a standalone Dino project. Tell us about that.
The beginning of the whole project, it starts the story with saying Dino, Alfredino, which was Enzo's son, wanted to start the V6 engine program. They had a Formula 2 car that had a V6 engine. They needed to homologate it between the Ferrari Dino, this vehicle, And the Fiat Dino, they created that homologation. They used that V6 in there. And in turn, this is the first mid-engine Ferrari of its times. Although it wasn't badged as a Ferrari, you know the story of why it wasn't badged as a Ferrari, right?
My understanding is there are no Ferrari badging on most Dinos. I'm going to say most Dinos because there's a little story about the badge on the back of this one. And the only place that you should see Ferrari dancing horse, the prancing horse emblem on a Dino is inside the door jamb on the plate down here. You won't find it on the front, on the hood, on the bonnet. You won't find it on the steering wheel or on the wheel caps. Now we do have on this car a Ferrari emblem on the rear.
This example, the beauty of it is the originality. Albeit all the mechanicals have been gone through extensively, and we have service records of that, and we'll go through it. The fact that the vehicle is remaining in factory paint, factory undercoating, and then yes, a lot of dealerships equipped it with that Ferrari badge because it was a good selling point.
Right.
But Ferrari from factory did not want their badges to be on the vehicle.
No.
At the time, Enzo was big into the big beefy V12s of the time, and they didn't want to put a V6 entry-level car.
It was a very curious project. And for those who are unaware of my history with Ferrari, I used to work with Great Ball Motors in England back in the 1980s, who were renowned for their restoration projects. And one of the problems that Ferrari had in selling the Dino, you've hit the nail right on the head there, is, well, where's the Ferrari emblem? How do we know what we're buying? And so for many years, this car was overlooked as something else. And the prices in England and the rest of the world, up until fairly recently, were quite affordable.
Yeah.
I mean, I had an opportunity to buy, I was a young mechanic in England with hardly any funds, but I was offered the chance to buy a couple for a few £1,000s and I couldn't rustle up the money to do it. Well, I really wish I had it done, and I really wish I'd had them to this day.
I know that in the marketplace, these stayed cheap for far too long.
Yeah.
And the problem is that most of them, the first year 206 Dinos, they were alloy bodies, aluminum, so be it. But the rest of the lineup, they all were steel body cars. And the problem was they all got rusty under the under panels. And depending on what part of the world you're from, if you're from the UK, these cars saw rust as soon as 2 years on.
There's so much salt on the road in England that that'd get thrown up, and yeah, the cars were susceptible to that. The patina on it is absolutely perfect. You can see it's slightly crazed, it's marked, but they are all marks, and as you say, the patina of age. This is the original paint.
Paint industry, we call these crow's feet, and that's effectively the actual single stage paint job starting to kind of like flake off like skin, if you will.
It starts to pull apart, right?
Pull apart, yeah. And there are parts of it that are, you know, more susceptible to heat, more susceptible, depending on where the car was stored, to sunlight. You see there are more in some than others.
Yep.
But the hard part is when you start with a restoration, you always want to start with the best vehicle that you can. When cars have been restored, these are approaching over $500,000 in value, and they're mostly all restored. Almost all of them have been completely nut and bolt rotisserie restoration.
Yeah.
This is showing you a virgin starting point that most other cars don't show itself to be.
That's exciting.
That is very exciting.
It really is. Yeah, because I mean, in my time in restoration, there's this golden rule that the last thing you want to do is over-restore something. You're trying to bring something back to the day that it left the facility, the factory in this case, in Maranello in headquarters in northern Italy. But if you don't need to touch something, don't touch it, because you're bound to affect the originality. We see a lot of restored Dinos, of course we do, and they are beautiful looking examples, like they were made yesterday. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But when you see an original car, that has great extra value because it's original. It hasn't been touched.
Yeah, the beauty of this example, like we said, is the fact that it's completely untouched in all the aspects. I mean, every car and model has its shortcomings. This is one of those cars that you could see, heck, for the time and for all the owners and the love that it had, even in the times where this car was not valuable, it was still sought after and taken care of. Yeah. It was still looked after and still driven, because that's an important part too.
Still driven, absolutely. And talking about driven and the driven lines around the car, when you look what Pininfarina did to the design of the 246 Dino, or the Dino project in its entirety, the 206 as you mentioned earlier on, this has just the most exquisite, wonderful flowing lines over the car.
It does.
It's one of the most beautiful things that in my opinion, one of the most beautiful things Pininfarina ever designed.
When you sit in the driver's seat and all you're looking over is the haunches of the front end,
Yeah.
it makes you feel like you're in an open top go-kart.
Yeah.
And you know, it has a rack and pinion steering wheel, and steering box.
Yeah.
So it feels super direct. It feels and drives like it looks, which is pretty rare.
Yeah,
for
you have a
car
very
like this.
direct connection to the road.
Right.
In many ways, it's an analog machine. The feedback from the road goes straight to the driver's hands on the steering wheel. You're absolutely right. But back in the 1970s, this is the artist, the aerodynamicist at work thinking, how do we control the airflow? So it's an artist's interpretation
Right.
of what is the best airflow around the car. That is something very special to me. That's what makes it a work of art.
It's true, we'll never ever see a car like this again. I'm no engineer, but today we know we have pedestrian laws, we have crash safety rating.
Yeah.
These times didn't have any of that, and the design shows itself. I mean, look how low this roof is. I mean, do you think there's any pedestrian safety here? None at all, but who cares? We were just trying to make the best shape we could to be as beautiful, because Pininfarina is known for making some beautiful designs, and as functional as possible.
You're exactly right. There was no real consideration to safety. There were no airbags, for example. But as we always talk about in automotive engineering, Marcel, like the contemporary cars that you describe now, which are loaded with safety features, and rightly so, we got here from there.
Right.
So we had to start from here and think, how do we improve the safety to get from it? And that's what happens. So seatbelts were improved, airbags were improved, electronics were improved. But what we see here is a beautiful, original condition, analog machine from the stables of Maranello, designed by Pininfarina. It's just exquisite, isn't it?
It is. They only made of the 246 GTs, their total number production run, I think it's about 5,000. The GTSs only saw 1,200 out of those 5,000. So it gets even rarer and rarer. And you know, the world knows the chairs and flares cars, basically Daytona seats and wide body fenders. And the United States has records of under 100 of those examples being imported. The UK has maybe 14. But it gets no better than this. This is like the latest generation of a Dino with the bigger engine. And then again, with that Targa top feeling when you're driving, it's kind of the best of all worlds.
Now, you mentioned earlier on that it's a V6 car. It's not a V8. It's certainly not a V12. It's a rear-mounted engine in the back. Can we have a look at that? Can you show me how the engine's installed in this Dino? First off, Marcel, the first thing that springs to mind to me from my years as working as a mechanic, whether on Ferrari or in Formula One, is a golden rule of chassis design and weight distribution on the car is get the engine as far forward as possible.
Well, that makes it more of a balanced vehicle.
Makes it a balanced vehicle, improves the handling of the car, makes it a more nimble steering car, more positive steering on the car. So not only did Ferrari not have the engine back here, which would have made it a lot easier to work on, shift it as far forward as possible, but also make sure that it's a transverse design, so the great mass of the engine is moved to the theoretical perfect center point of the car, which I'm going to say is somewhere around about here. So they're not far off of getting a perfect 50-50. You want to go really for about a 50-50 distribution. The serviceability of the engine, well, one bank is very easy to get to, but tell us about the front bank.
Well, you got the bulkhead right behind the firewall, so it's harder to adjust things like the timing chain tensioner on it. On this particular example, I have history of head gaskets being done, all the valves and cylinder head work being done, and the timing chains were also adjusted at that time. But they actually made this engine quite accessible. You actually can service the vehicle by removing the wheels, the fender liner, and then you have access to things like the AC compressors, the drive belts, which, by the way, in the 70s, this is equipped with actually well-functioning AC system. This one here works just as well as it did of the day it came out of the factory, which is very impressive.
It really is.
But you can work on the top of the engine, albeit a little bit crammed on that side, but the carburetors are very easily accessible. The side makes it really easy to access this side of the engine. There's no timing belts or anything to do with this one, but I think as far as working on a vintage Ferrari, this is as easy as it gets, because on 355s, for example, which is much later in the era, engine has to come out. on 360s, you could access the belts, but you have to remove the interior. This is as good as it gets. And it has Ferrari pricing, but because all the parts are readily available, it's a thing that can be kept up throughout the years. It's kind of impressive. A 60s car that went all the way into the 70s, and you still could get parts today.
One thing that's essential to have that springs to mind straight away, Marcel, is the domed nuts that hold the covers down onto the head where the cams are.
Throughout the years, you saw different ones run in there?
Yeah, and yes, because if they were lost and you couldn't get those correct dome nuts, folks, if they couldn't get access to that, would change them for a metric design, just a metric nut. I think they're either 5mm or 6mm thread on them, but if you can get or keep the original dome nuts, that's a very impressive thing. Now, of course, they're available.
It's kind of what the dream of a car that's been taken care of. It's what you want to see.
Yeah, and the cooling pipes you mentioned is very important. I have to remember, yes, as we can clearly see, the engine is mounted in the rear, the radiator is mounted up in the front.
Right.
You've got to unite those two components, and so there are a couple of long, extensive rubber hoses that go through a chassis tube to mate the engine cooling system to the radiator. And I have a memory of one of the potential weak points on the Dino was the pipes that connected to the rubber hose that goes through the chassis to the rubber hoses connected onto the engine itself.
You appreciate the things that took time in this place to get the car to survive to this time.
That's exactly right. It's from a different era. And now, of course, all the car communities can come together. What we're doing today, for example, is a classic example of that. We can share this wonderful car with the world. Well, we couldn't do that years ago.
This car was not something you would see all the time, but now we're all kind of desensitized because of the internet. You get to see the upsides, the downsides of almost every vehicle out there, and you can see what the driving experience. And then also the intention of it is to show in transparency the shape of the car and what it feels like to drive it and to own it. So we'll go through that and we'll actually get you some detailed experience on that. Moving towards the interior of the vehicle, we see that the actual leather and the door panels are in great shape. Again, completely unrestored. It has some rubbing on the bolster here and some crackling. We've moisturized this and cleaned this up as best as we could. Obviously the dyes and the materials of the era are not as good as modern cars, but you can see here what it would look like completely unrestored. Again, no holes, no puncturing. Actually, the seats feel super comfortable and they're actually well padded. So I just wanted to show a little bit of the interior and its shape. The seat back adjusters work really well, and again, it's fixed back. We've got the seat belts, they fully retract and they click in, both of them. And then once I turn on the vehicle, we can see that the fan works, the defroster works, the heat works. This glove box button is kind of fragile, but it still works perfectly. And here we've got your mirror and also a serial number registration. I laugh because the mirror is kind of comical. How do you get anybody to use that? And the infamous sun visors that are suctioned to the windshield. That's how you get these to work. Very Italian solution to a sun visor. If you want to get this angle, you can see that the suction cups are what keeps it in there. Again, they're fully functioning and retracting. And for me, it's all about the whole package of the vehicle. Small things like the interior lights working matter to me because I want to see that all the things that were from factory are original and are still there. Again, this is the index closer. You never grab it through here, you will break this off. So you close it this way. And then moving ashtray. You need your ashtray. Super clean, actually. You can tell not many people, maybe a couple people have smoked in here, but it's all cleaned out by now. Horn button works perfectly. We've got the voltage meter, got the coolant temperature, oil pressure, fuel, and we've got the clock. Out of all of them, the only one that's not working is the clock. Everything else is fully functioning. The odometer's working perfectly. It's very important. A lot of them stop working and they stop registering miles. This one's been working. We have history of the vehicle from 20,000 miles to 28,000 miles. We turn on the fan and turn on the AC. We're starting to get some cooling now. It's a very humid day out right now, but we'll get a temperature reading on this so you guys can see that it actually is cooling. There's the antenna button and it's working. And turning on the radio, we could also see that you could also hear the speakers are working. Hazard button, left turn signal, right turn signal, lights turning on. Actually, this is the turn signal. This is that. Actually, I messed this up. Let's do this again, James. Lights turn on, left turn signal, right turn signal, and then this will be your hazard, or this will be your flashers, your high beams. Let's take it up on a ramp. One thing I wanted to mention is while we got the vehicle started and it's cold, you can see putting it in second gear, there will not be any synchro noise. That's very important. There's first, here's second. There's no synchro noises, so we can tell that the car has been driven well. They're very sensitive to cold driving. They're supposed to be very hard to shift in cold weather. Once the vehicle warms up, then it gets very smooth, but that's traditional of every 5-speed from this era. So now we're underneath the vehicle and we've got Steve, who actually can shed some real good light since he's worked on these vehicles from original. And I mean, it's been a couple of years, Steve, but there are some things in here that we could highlight and look over. The car brings some transparency. And again, we looked at the front earlier from the top, but from the bottom, you can see all this is steel, all of it is there. There's barely any surface rust on it, which is really, really good testament to the drivers that own the vehicle. It's very easy to park on a speed bump and just kind of dent this or crack it. And you can see here the battery cover from underneath is very much intact. We'll get some good shots and details in it. The battery is housed right here.
The wonderful air compressor for the very distinctive horn, isn't it?
That's what that is, right?
Absolutely.
The air horn there.
Yeah. That's what gives that very distinctive horn. But you mentioned it earlier on, Marcel, when you look underneath, well, a Dino in this case, this will tell you how well the car has been driven. The upper bodywork will show you how well it's been maintained and polished and taken care of, but the underside will give all the indications of road marks on it.
And how it's been serviced as well.
Absolutely, yes, it will, yeah. So you can see, you mentioned the fiberglass earlier on, and it is fiberglass, it's pre-carbon fiber,
right,
of course. But you can see all that, you can see the chopped fibers very clearly in the panel. So that is original, that is correct. You should expect to see some fluid marks around the car. You're always going to get that. I mean, the car has certainly been driven, it's been used. The radiator is mounted at the top, above us here.
Right here,
yeah, and here is one of the hoses we were mentioning earlier on. It started to run back through the chassis. So right down the center section of the car, and we can show that when we get towards the back as well, that's where the two rubber hoses disappear. So there's no way of being able to inspect the condition of those pipes without removing them, which is a massive drama. But there is no inspection holes around that tube to see what's happening on the inside there.
Steve, can we see, like I see here, the radiator has the upper hose and our lower hose, those radiator hoses, which do go all the way to the back. Those look real good, and I love the bracketry on it, or the hardware, so be it. It looks like it's been done at some point. They're not leaking, so that's really good.
It is really good, and antifreeze over the years is very telling. You'll see it, right? It gives a witness mark.
Right.
As soon as you get one little leak with antifreeze, it's very good in that regard, that it will leave a witness mark of where it's leaking from. Yeah. And you would expect to see some marks and damage around the car. One of the things you would expect to see on a genuine Dino that's being honest is if you've broken down at the side of the road at midnight and you've got your tuxedo on and you need to change a spare tire, you're not getting on the ground to find out where to jack these cars up. And so it's very obvious where people have put the jacks in the wrong place and lifted the car, tried to raise it, and it will start to bend the floor because you put it in the wrong place. Really, you want to be on the lower suspension arms for security, or there is one of the chassis tubes runs back here at 45 degrees and you can get under here.
I see that. That's a good strength point right there.
But look at this. This is classic indication that somebody, I would suggest somebody's put a jack under there.
Okay.
There's more witness marked over on the other side as well but it's, again, it's all honest indications of the car's history.
I love seeing that the under tray, which again, made out of steel, is all fully intact. And even the parts that are exposed to the elements, like this area here, you see it hasn't gone through all the way. It's just surface rust. The tubular chassis is what really is important for me. You mentioned on the front that we have the tubular frame here.
Yeah.
You can see it has gotten some road pitting on it, but that's as perfect as it could be.
Yeah.
It goes and follows all the way through. The fender arches, they're made out of glass fiber as well, right? Because I see the hairs pointing out of the sides.
Yeah, they should be, One interesting point I'm going to point out to you, Marcel, about the design of the chassis. In this period of Maranello's history, it's not square tubing and it isn't round tubing, it's oval tubing.
Yeah, it looks kind of like this.
Yeah, they make it oval because that gives the most torsional rigidity when you're loading it up and down on that axis.
Very cool.
It makes it, it's the strongest thing you can do with that tube is to make it not round, not square, but to make it oval. So that's what Ferrari did. So all the main chassis tubes around Dino are designed that way to give that maximum rigidity. One point, again, we should mention when we're at the front of the car, the suspension on a Dino is adjustable. The camber and caster on the Dino is adjustable with shims behind the front suspension pickups.
Oh,
so
I see.
two for the lower arm on one side, two for the suspension arm on the other. And when you just as a quick visual inspection, when you look at the car, you want to see, if the car is tracking honestly, you want to see a similar number of shims side to side. And this has got what, maybe one shim each side, so maybe a millimeter shim.
Yeah.
Front and rear, which is very good. What you don't want to see is a stack of, say, 15 mil shims on one side, and somebody's had to take the angle grinder on the other side to push it together, which is indicative that the frame's been twisted.
Got it.
So when you see a car like this, and it looks like they haven't been touched for years, quite frankly, but that's perfectly okay. What you're looking for is symmetry side to side. It's just a good visual clue that the frame is straight.
Yes,
yeah,
it's very important.
Yeah, here is the ovalated section of the chassis, the tube that runs straight down here. So you can see the two coolant
upper and lower radiator hoses that go all the way
right
to the
here.
front.
But you see, from here until down there, you can't see them.
Right.
They're lost.
Right.
So you just have to, cross your fingers and hope everything's okay. And earlier on, I mentioned that these pipes tended to just rot out and rust out over a period of time.
Look how nice they look like, because they've been obviously redone.
And they would rot right here. Where the water sits in the bottom here, they'd start to rot out here and here. So they're the two pipes. And boy, oh boy, we had such a drama trying to get hold of these from Maranello back in the day because we couldn't get them.
Yeah,
so we were trying to make our own. We were trying to weld them up and that sort of thing. Now, of course, you don't need to do that. I'm sure you can get them relatively easy. Jacking points on the rear, Marcel, much easier to see than the front.
Yes.
We can see this
super
section.
beefy right here.
Yeah, left and right, we've got these triangulated sections, which is cool. This is a really strong part of the car. Fuel tanks, left and right.
So both of these are fuel tanks, right?
Both of these are fuel tanks, yeah. And they have a balance pipe. You can see right here.
Oh, right there.
There's a balance pipe, and here's a drain bung, so you can drain the fuel. So effectively, the two tanks balance each other out. You don't have to use an electric pump to change from starboard to port tanks. They'll just balance through that one pipe, and they fit here. But they are quite a nightmare. If you do have to get these fuel tanks out, they're a bit of a nightmare. And you mentioned earlier on the inner fender.
For accessibility for
service.
Yeah,
that's come out.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest problems we used to encounter back in the 80s was all the bolts. No one thought to put any copper ease or lubricant on those bolts, and you just break every single one off. You couldn't.
They rust and seize, right?
Yeah, they were so fragile that they would break off, and of course that would turn a 10-minute job into a 3-hour job because you have to re-drill and re-tap and repair all that.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a. So you didn't really want to get involved with taking a fuel tank out, but that's how you did it. Here it is.
And Steve, I'm looking at these straps. They're made out of steel. They
Yeah.
look like they're in excellent shape.
Yeah,
too.
they do.
That's very.
And it's a very cool. This is a little sign, to my eye, of Maranello having a history in racing, because you don't just have the tank strap sitting around the tank and connected here. You want some sort of support as it comes
So
around,
they squished
as it comes around the radius of the tank there, and that's what Ferrari did, was to put this little bracket on here so that the strap would sit in it and you wouldn't get any lateral movement on it. Yeah. So
very cool.
Here's that more of that. You can see it very clearly here.
Yeah, here I get
overlated pipe tube chassis frame on the back, and the shims left and right. Again, if you look at the stack of shims, there are more shims on the rear than on the front.
Right.
That isn't the issue. Once again, you're looking for a symmetrical set. So let's gauge that to be 8 millimeters worth of shimming in there.
I'd say that 8 to 10 is
and
right.
if we look on the opposite side, pretty much the same. A little bit less on one side, but that's usually, you're going to get a little bit of variation. The front is exactly the same. So I would say that's more, again, that's indicative that the frame is straight. Someone's just been playing around to set the geometry on the car, but there's nothing, it's clearly there's nothing off. Again, you haven't got 15 mil on one side and 0 on the other side.
Right.
No, so you would expect to see a little variation, but all in all, front to rear, I'd say that's a good indication to me that the frame is where it should be.
We have engine mounts here, which is, I guess, well, this is actually the transaxle. So this is the transaxle.
You got the diff mounted in up here, and it's very clean down here.
I know. Well, clearly someone's resealed all this stuff, because there's not a drop of oil, and they usually collect some.
I like to see this when anyone has drained the oil out, that they mark it with a paint pen just so you can see any movements on the plug. This is just a nice thing. It shows that somebody's been doing it correctly. You know, I like to see that. I like
seeing also, because then the technician knows, if whoever's worked on behind them, that someone's done something differently.
Yeah. So this is the
transmission.
This is the transmission drain here, and this is the motor transmission.
Right.
So
cambio means
gearbox. Yeah. So I'm not very good on Italian, but those little words that you see every day, you know, when you're working on Ferrari, you pick it up. Yeah. So gearbox and engine.
And then we see like the axle boots look very nice as well. All the rubbers for it are great.
Yeah.
There's no grease slinging or anything.
And they are the correct nuts to have on the back. They're like a castellated nut in a way, but it's the top section of the nut has a crimping effect, which will grip onto the bolt to keep it in place. And you should also see as well, Marcel, behind the head of the cap head bolts which go through, they have a little shim. You'll notice it between the two, and then there'll be 2 at the top. So there isn't. This is absolutely correct. There is no shim between these 2. Because they're closer together, but these 2 and 2 further around, you'll find that there are those shims underneath, which again, they should be there. It shows to me that whoever has worked on the car in the past has done it correctly, put them back correctly.
Very nice.
Yeah.
The factory exhaust system meets all the way up to the actual catback, which goes to this Tubi style stainless steel exhaust. It's an Italian aftermarket exhaust, but all this here, in fact, for the exhaust manifolds, look to be original, which is great.
One of the weaknesses of the Dino design, and we mentioned it earlier on when we were outside looking at the car, it's where I'm going to call it the front bank of the engine is mounted up against the firewall. The header, the exhaust head is a nightmare to get to.
Can you imagine?
If you have to replace it, you have to replace it, but that's one, it's very difficult to see. Even from down here looking up, you can kind of see where it goes, but it's very well hidden between the rear firewall and the head of the engine. And that is a potential weakness. So if you ever hear a slight exhaust blow on a Dino and you can't find it because the rear box and everything looks, go for that.
Go for that.
Because nobody's bothered to replace it, because it's a drama to get to. The handbrake works off the calipers, so it is disc brakes all the way around. It's a very basic system for the handbrake to work. It's just got the cable here hooked over a lever, and the lever pushes one of the pistons out. You know, just
awesome.
You know, my advice to anybody that owns a 246 Dino, do not park it on a hill relying entirely on the handbrake.
Go to the gear.
Put it in gear and leave it in gear. It's a weakness of the design, but it's not just the Dino. A lot of
everything in the 70s
really,
is like this. But I love what I'm seeing here. I can see the valve cover, at least on the rear bank of the engine. It looks super dry. I mean, I can see it's been resealed, but it's done well.
Yes. And even if you look at the top, Marcel, the hoses and the clamps, you mentioned them earlier on, they look aged, but they look correct.
Yeah.
They look
like they've been replaced.
Yeah, they look correct. And I'll tell you, the first place where you'll start to notice it is it forms on the stud.
Yeah,
exactly right.
I've seen them where they get like a little drip.
They get a little bead of oil form on the stud, so you can go straight to it and see it. Yeah.
Very cool to see all that. And I know a lot of people talk about the synchros when they're cold.
Yeah.
They're very hard to shift, but if you let the gearbox warm up, they go in as smooth as butter.
That's exactly right.
And we have modern fluids nowadays that have, definitely made the driving experience a little bit better.
Yeah.
So I know all these have been changed out. We've got service records of all that being done.
Here, when we're trying to point out the weaknesses, and I'm not saying this is a weakness, but we can see here this little gator as it started to break open, but it's because of oil contamination.
Is that the shift shaft seal?
Yeah, it's just a gator. So there's no word or anything in there.
I know what you mean.
You know, it's a protector.
Right.
But they start to rot. They do. It's just. But what happens is over the years, oil gets on that, and it just starts to break down.
Swell and break down.
Yeah. But if we're here to highlight the weaknesses of the car as much as the strength of the car, to give a full, honest appraisal, just look for this sort of thing. But it's nothing major. Be aware that it's there.
Yeah.
You can see, to the best of my knowledge, this was an alley panel. I don't think it's steel. I think it was alley, and nothing wants to stick to it. Like it's just, you know what I mean. You can see it just doesn't want to key into the surface. But also, when you see these marks, you can see just how supple. You would expect to see that. Like there's no great structural rigidity into this panel. It's really more for aeroflow, frankly.
Got it.
But when you see things like this, don't get overly concerned that, oh my goodness, what on earth is happening here? This could have been done just by a curbstone or something. Something very minimal will cause that amount of damage. There's no real strength in this. It's just, it exists. Right. It exists, and that's it, really, yeah.
Thank you for looking at this with me, Steve. I bring some transparency that, we need to have showcased, and it's nice to have eyes from someone that has had their hands and eyes on it when it was brand new at the
Well, I appreciate very much you asking me to come down and have a look at it with you. It's a fun trip down memory lane for me to be underneath a 246 Dino. And again, if I saw this car in this condition back in 1987 when I was working at Great Hall in England, I wouldn't be surprised. So it's aged incredibly well.
Yeah.
It really has, yeah. I'm impressed with it.
Well, we're lucky to have the owners prior to this take care of it and keep it in this shape. We're just the caretakers. We're just the caretakers for the future generations that are going to keep owning it.